Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Jeffrey Epstein Show. I'm your host, Bobbycapucci, and this is a morning update. One of the number one questions I have received via email and Twitter is, what happens now? What does Ghislaine Maxwell do now that she is in custody? Is she going to turn state's evidence? Is she going to try and get herself a plea deal? Is she going to go to trial and try and beat these charges? These are all the questions that we all have right now. In my opinion, the most likely situation is that Ghislaine Maxwell tries to turn state's evidence and tries to offer up others who were involved. Now the question becomes, who could she possibly offer up that is higher on the food chain than herself? And that's what this game becomes. They're going to try and juice her for whatever they possibly can. And if she can offer them people that are higher up on the food chain, well, perhaps she isn't going to be staring at 150 years. Perhaps she'll be staring at 40 years. Because there is no deal on this planet worth her not getting any jail time, right? So the jail time for her, she'll end up looking at, if they drop RICO charges on her, I mean, she's already looking at some pretty serious charges. But if they drop RICO on her and they start talking about, lengthy 45, 50-year sentences, stuff like that, well, it becomes a whole different animal. And someone like Ghislaine Maxwell, she is really into self-preservation, right? Her whole entire goal is to try and come out of this unscathed and get back to so-called her social life. Her, people like Andrew, they still believe. Well, I don't know about Ghislaine believing anymore, but up until she was arrested, she still believed at some point she'd make a comeback. She believed at some point her image would be refurbished and she'd be able to come back into so-called polite society amongst all of the other disgusting elites. That's how depraved and deranged these people's thought patterns are. This lady truly believed that she was going to be invited back into polite society. She thought that she'd go on the run here and everybody would forget about this story eventually, or one of her friends would swoop in and save her. Well, that's obviously not happening. She is now left holding the bag, and she is considered the leader of this criminal enterprise at this point. So unless she starts blabbing away, she goes Tekashi 69, she's going to face all of these criminal penalties on her own. And we know that somebody like Ghislaine Maxwell is never going to take the fall for anybody else. So, from my experience covering situations like this, RICO cases, people getting arrested that have 40, 50-year, 60-year drug sentences, mandatory drug sentences hanging over their head, it's inevitable that they turn state's evidence. Very few people take the time. And I'm talking about hardened gangsters. I'm talking about mafia members, cartel members, people in the Russian mafia. These people aren't taking, these long sentences like the old days. You mean to tell me Ghislaine Maxwell is more built for this life than Gaspipe Casso? Or Al Diarco? Or Sammy the Bull Gravano? She's not. And when the pressure comes, she will break. The real question we should be asking ourselves is, what can she offer the prosecution that would make it worth their time to get into a plea deal with this serpent? Our article today is in the same vein. This is an article from The Guardian, and the headline, "What's next for Ghislaine Maxwell, and will she cooperate with prosecutors?" This article was authored by Victoria Bobbycapucci. While Ghislaine Maxwell's arrest Thursday in relation to confidant Jeffrey Epstein's sex crimes answered some questions about her life, revealing, for example, that she hid at a sprawling $1 million New Hampshire estate where she was picked up in a morning raid. Still, more questions arose about what's next for the mysterious British socialite. Socialite, huh? Co-conspirator, child molester, all-around scumbag. That is the better label for her. Now, what's interesting to me is I would like to see some video footage of this, right? Again, why wasn't any of the media tipped off that she was getting arrested? Why wasn't anyone there to take pictures? Can we see some pictures of the actual raid? As she sits in custody with plans by federal law enforcement to move her from New England to New York, at the top of many minds was whether Maxwell, long accused of grooming underage victims for Epstein, will cooperate with prosecutors. There is no doubt in my mind, folks. How long have I been telling you guys this? Once they get them into the office, once they get them down in front of an interrogator, the lips are gonna start flapping. The question is, what can she offer to make it worth their while? Despite Epstein's death in a jail cell in Manhattan last August while awaiting trial, the authorities continued to investigate his crimes and other people in his network. Maxwell, 58, was charged on Thursday in a 17-page indictment with allegedly enticing a minor to travel to engage in criminal sexual activity, transporting a minor with the intent to engage in criminal sexual activity, conspiracy to commit both of those crimes, and perjury related to a sworn deposition. If convicted, she faces up to 35 years in federal prison. And again, that is just on these charges that have been put forward as of now. More charges are most certainly coming. You just have to see it right here. Conspiracy to commit both of these crimes. These are all RICO charges. These are all predicates to RICO. And if the prosecution and Audrey Strauss is serious about their business, then we will see them bludgeon them with these charges. At a press conference in Manhattan early Thursday afternoon, federal prosecutor Audrey Strauss, acting U.S. Attorney for the Southern District of New York, accused Maxwell of lying about allegations that she conspired with Epstein and also was directly responsible for some of the sexual abuse herself because the truth was almost unspeakable. And this is what I was talking about, the perjury charge and why it's so important. What this perjury charge does is it blows up the whole entire defamation case. The one that was settled between Virginia, the one with the sealed records, yeah, that whole case is getting blown up now because all of the charges made by Virginia are now amplified to a huge proportion, considering that the prosecution just charged Ghislaine Maxwell with lying about those very instances that are within that deposition. So what it does is, well, we all know how credible Virginia is already, but it adds even more weight to her claims. That's why people are freaking out right now. That's why people like Dershowitz are losing their shit. Then Strauss was asked whether the perjury charge could impact Maxwell's potential value if she were to cooperate. This sometimes happens where there are perjury charges, and people can go on from there and become cooperators, Strauss said. And remember, this is being oversaw by the Public Corruptions Office as well within the SDNY. So this has long-ranging implications, folks. And with Audrey Strauss confirming here that the perjury charge is a step for people to become cooperators, it's very apparent what's going on here. And it really is going to come down to, what does she bring to the table, meaning Ghislaine Maxwell? Who can she offer up? If she can offer up a juicy enough target that they can go big trophy hunting on, she might find herself getting half of the sentence she was originally going to get. But at the end of the day, there is zero chance that Ghislaine Maxwell is walking on this, even if she cooperates. It's basically between a life sentence and a chance at maybe getting parole at some time in her life when she's 95 or something. Those are the stakes right now. She continued, so I'm not concerned about that. And if Maxwell were to become a cooperator, Strauss said of the perjury charge, I think we could deal with that. Of course they can, and that's why they slapped it on her, right? Again, I'm not a lawyer, certainly not a prosecutor, and I don't have half the legal mind that Audrey Strauss has. But it's obvious when you follow the pieces here what's going on, especially if you've followed other federal cases before and seen how they build these cases. This is very typical. In a RICO case, sometimes it takes 10 years to build that case. At this point, any talk of Maxwell's cooperation, typically a plea deal in return for information about other perpetrators, remains hypothetical. Of course it does. Anything that we can't confirm is is speculation, an educated guess. But when you follow how these cases break, you can kind of get a handle on what to expect moving forward. And it's difficult to say how any potential cooperation would play out. Following Epstein's death, many now perceive the wealthy socialite, aka co-conspirator, as the ringleader in his abuse conspiracy. Yes, 100%, not many, all. She was the shadow boss. What do you think, Jeffrey Epstein's dumbass knew how to do this? His socially awkward ass could have gotten involved in this? Oh, sure, he had proclivities and he was a sick dude. But as far as masterminding this whole entire plot, I don't believe it. I'm sorry, I do not believe it. Ghislaine Maxwell was very, very much involved in all leadership decisions. It's more common for cooperators to be low-level participants in criminal activity, not ringleaders. The idea being that their cooperation would implicate the higher-level offenders, now those lower down a crooked hierarchy. And that's what we've talked about on here from the beginning when I talked about RICO, right? That's how they usually do it. They'll go out, they'll arrest the lieutenants, then the lieutenants will finger the capos, the capos will finger the underboss and the consigliere, and then from there, the boss goes next. But what happens when you go after a boss? Well, they've done this in the mafia before. And what they do is they finesse that information and they leverage that information and they use it to keep going up the totem pole and to try and get the leadership in others' families, people they've had business dealings with, etc., etc. So you can expect them to do the same here. David Weinstein, a former federal prosecutor who now handles white-collar criminal defense at Hinshaw and Culbertson, pointed to the potential lengthy sentence as a possible incentive to cooperate. If Maxwell pleaded guilty rather than going on trial, she could face less time. And that's why these RICO charges and charges of conspiracy like this are so important, because they carry such time that it forces people into plea agreements. It forces people to turn state's evidence because nobody wants to face these kind of charges. They will use all of this to pressure her into cooperating against the other known and unknown co-conspirators mentioned in counts 1 and 3 of the indictment, Weinstein told The Guardian in an email. However, keep in mind that at this point, with Epstein dead, she is the kingpin of the organization. Weinstein said of how prosecutors likely perceive Maxwell. If she cooperates, she would be cooperating down. Those co-conspirators would have to be high-profile individuals to warrant prosecutors accepting her cooperation. 100%. This is what I was just talking about. You have to give them a trophy for you to get any sort of deal. Now the question becomes who that trophy could be. And there are a lot of people. What sort of evidence does she have on Trump? What sort of evidence does she have on Bill Clinton? What sort of evidence does she have on Les Wexner, Glenn Dubin, Bill Richardson, etc., etc.? Once the prosecutors have their hands on that evidence and they're able to use that evidence perhaps in a criminal case against other people, then we'll have a better idea of what sort of situation Maxwell finds herself in. Because as of right now, I have zero doubt that her lawyer has already contacted the prosecution trying to work out a deal and hammer something out. Britain's The Sun newspaper on Friday reported that a former associate of Epstein, Stephen Hoffenberg, who spent 20 years in prison for a financial pyramid or Ponzi scheme, predicted that Maxwell will quickly crack in custody and cooperate. Yeah, no shit. Anybody who knows anything about this knows that. Anybody who ever has followed a case like this, anybody who has ever followed organized crime, understands the significance of charges like these, and they know what is coming next. So of course, Steve Hoffenberg, who has went through this sort of thing himself, obviously, going to prison for a long time, etc., etc., he knows how this game is played. And that's exactly how I see it from here. She is going to crack, she's going to squeal, and she's going to rat. And if you get Kellen in there, you get Adriana Ross in there, you get Marcinkova in there, you get Groff in there, you get Jean-Luc Brunel in there, all of these people will be looking to flip quicker than Tekashi 6ix9ine. Julie Rendelman, a New York criminal defense lawyer who formerly worked as a prosecutor, said that cooperation wasn't off the table despite Maxwell's potential alleged high rank. I agree with that as well. Could she cooperate? Sure, she could cooperate, even though many view her at this point without Epstein as being the highest in the chain, Rendelman said, adding, however, we don't know for sure she is. And that, again, folks, that is the truth. If you've been following this case like we have, you understand this goes much deeper. People like Les Wexner. People like anyone else involved in the mega group. A full accounting must be had. But cooperation wouldn't necessarily be a get-out-of-jail-free card, but may instead get her leniency when it comes to sentencing in the end, Rendelman said, 100%. That's exactly what it is. It won't be her getting off scot-free here. There's zero chance she's not doing jail time and a significant amount of jail time. It's just a matter of, is it going to be life at this point, or maybe a chance of parole at some point? That's if she turns state's evidence and she can offer up something juicy enough. Asked whether he had anything to say about Maxwell's arrest or the cooperation question, her lawyer, Lawrence Vogelman, said in an email, sorry, no comment. Maxwell has long maintained that she did not engage in any wrongdoing. Well, this is her chance. If she's so about it, if she's such a G, if she's such a gangster, and she didn't do anything, let's go to trial and see. Roll the dice. Somehow I doubt that's going to occur. Daniel Alonzo, a former federal prosecutor who's a partner at Buckley's LLP New York City office, said, clearly, the top of the pyramid in this case was Epstein, and he's gone. So it all depends on the government's perception of the relative value of its own mission of prosecuting other people that they might not otherwise be able to convict without her testimony. And that's significant, because they might have dossiers opened on a bunch of people, but they don't have what they need to get them over the hump. And Maxwell will be able to fill in those blanks. Jean-Luc Brunel, I'm looking at you, my dude. Don't think we've forgotten about you, my friend. Don't think that you're not next. And don't think that we're not going to be laser focused on where you are and what you have done. Because, my dude, your time is certainly coming as well. Even if the FBI concluded that the people she can cooperate against are somehow less culpable, that wouldn't mean that they wouldn't find value in her cooperation, Alonzo pointed out. That's true as well. But her leniency and the time shaved off will be a lot less if she's ratting down. Ratting up is the way you usually want to go. But at the same time, they want prosecutions in this case. And if she can help them get the core four, well, she will get some leniency for that. But not the kind of leniency she would get for giving them somebody in a leadership role. There are many instances where the government has used so-called higher-level people against so-called lower-level people, he continued. It's not the norm. It's much more common to cooperate people up, but it's not unheard of, and we've seen this with the mafia as well. When they have turned bosses in the past, they've used the bosses to rat down and rat on their capos, rat on the underboss, etc., etc. So it's certainly not unheard of. But like they say here, it's not the norm either. He also said that cooperators can still be effective even if they're implicated in perjury. There's a sort of misconception that if somebody has a perjury conviction, that they're never useful as a witness ever again. That's not true, he said. The question is not, did they lie the first time? The question is whether they're telling the truth now. So it will be, if she does flip, say, and they use her, the defense attorneys for whoever she's ratting on will certainly point to the perjury charge to try and call her testimony into question. That is for sure going to happen. That's how these sort of things work, right? It's a battle of credibility when they get into these courtrooms. And the prosecutors and the defense attorneys during cross are going to blast and go both ways and try and go hard, right? And that's to be expected. The question remains here, in my opinion, the most important question remains. If she is turning state's evidence, What can she provide that would make the prosecutors willing to enter into a deal with the devil? If you'd like to contact me, you can do that at bobbycapucci@protonmail.com. That's BOBBYCAPUCCI@protonmail.com. You can also find me on Twitter at BOBBY_CAPUCCI. In the description box, you will find a link to the article, and you will also find a link to the GoFundMe if you would like to help the podcast. All right, everybody, we'll be back later on with the Daily Drop. Enjoy your Friday afternoon.